Welcome to the Know. I am Ashley.
And I'm Adam.
A new report has leaked out that the next generation of Xbox console will have not one but two versions, which isn't a huge surprise. They did at E3 mention consoles in the multiple. But what is interesting is that one of them may not be a traditional console. It might be more of a streaming box, which would be definitely a departure from Microsoft and really all console makers' previous strategies. So we're going to break it down a little bit, what the leak is, what it says, and what the implications are, because theoretically this could change a lot for the way console games work.
Yeah, it's scary. Interesting, but scary.
Yeah, right. It's fascinating on the one hand, but then you have to wonder if the technology is there to support it just yet. Streaming consoles have been tried in the past. Streaming services are still gaining traction, and we'll get into all of those as well. But the quick summary is that the codename for the next generation Xbox is Scarlett. That there will be one traditional console that will run all games directly on the hardware as you would expect a console to do, and that is expected to release in 2020. And that the other version will be a streaming console that will contain some hardware, enough to run certain portions of games and do some processing on the client side, but then offload a lot of the processing to the cloud.
Right, so there's some hybrid technology going on.
Right.
Interesting.
So it's not going to be able to get quite as cheap as if it was just a stick that was streaming in the entire game. It will have some hardware costs associated with it, but it brings it way, way down.
Seems like an interesting way to make up for like some of the limitations. Like I think some of the things they talked about potentially having on there was like player collision and just handling basic controller inputs and things like that. Like, seems like a way to bridge those limitations with a local hardware system and then like having the majority of the work be done off-site.
Agreed. Although it does seem like getting everything to play nicely could be a huge headache. Not our headache, thankfully. This is a headache on the part of Microsoft because that's where all of the work will be taking place and where all the coordination will be happening. But there's also interesting implications that they're trying to get the price down. They want this streaming version to potentially be much more mainstream consumer friendly, whereas those of us in the traditional hardcore gaming space, we want our console, we want our hardware, we want it running locally because that's where it's going to look the best. And we will take this traditional version, but this other one exists for people who maybe don't play games all the time, who, like Nintendo has found their corner of gaming where their consumers care a lot less about how high resolution and how amazing games look and more about the gameplay experience.
Totally.
Because that's one thing that we've seen with PlayStation Now, for example, is it's viable. There is some latency involved, but overall, if you can deal with the decreases in graphical fidelity, then it is a serviceable option for people who want to go that route.
And I think I watched a lot of like developer talks from E3, and it sounds like a lot of what Microsoft is saying about streaming services in general is that they want to be able to provide the option for people to use streaming services. They're not saying that like this will be the only thing and the only way people should play games, but they want people to like if they want to sacrifice a little bit of fidelity and like they don't necessarily need like one-to-one input on games, but they want the option to have that, they want to provide that option. They want this to be something that people can use, not necessarily have to use, or not. They're not saying it's the best way to play, but it's an option for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Microsoft has been going much more in that ecosystem direction as well. Think what possibilities this could have for PC.
Right.
Maybe lower-end PCs will be able to run some of these games by offloading some of the hard work to the cloud in a very similar way.
Mobile devices.
Absolutely. Phones, tablets.
That's what they're into. I think, are we talking about concerns yet?
We're just talking.
Okay. I think one of the weird thing to me is that obviously this is going to require an interconnection that's like stable and of decent speed.
Well, PlayStation Now, just as a benchmark, recommends a minimum of 5 megabits per second.
Down?
I'm not sure.
I'm assuming it's down. Yeah, that would make sense. But that's not that to me isn't nuts. But I think we're kind of in the majority where most people have a stable internet connection, like something that's available to us. But more and more we're seeing stuff like data caps, and we're seeing stuff like there are people that don't buy digital games simply because like their connections aren't solid enough. And like there's still big portions of the world that this isn't an option to. So that is a little interesting to me. That I mean, obviously this is good to have the option for people that do have good internet connections, but like if it's a cheaper option, I don't know. Like I feel like it's still going to be demanding in a different way. Like you're still going to have a good internet connection, even though the hardware is cheaper. And assuming that it's all streaming, do you think people are going to be buying physical games for the streaming box? Or is it something that, you just pay a little extra a month because you have the streaming box and it's like a Netflix for games and you can just have access to our library?
Microsoft is definitely going that direction with Xbox Game Pass.
Right.
So if this were to be maybe a smaller cost as an initial investment, I could see potentially having a subscription or something service-based in order to run it, because this is the kind of hardware that will then continue to incur service costs to run.
Yeah, definitely like more than just an Xbox Live subscription. Something that's like an all-in-one Scarlett subscription that gives you access to a games library.
Right. You get access to Xbox Live. You get access to Xbox Game Pass. Right. You get access to all of the streaming for this in this convenient package. Or people can pick and choose. The monthly subscription for PlayStation Now is $10 a month. It does get discounted if you get, say, a year subscription. That's $99.99. So it's $100 instead of the full $120 that it would be if you were buying a monthly.
I wonder what...
But that's ballpark.
I haven't actually used PlayStation Now. I don't know if you have, but I wonder what the input lag is like, because using something like a Steam Link, it's fine. You get... I think it's measured at like 2 millisecond input lag over my local network, which is basically what you would get with a wireless controller anyway, like 1 to 2 milliseconds. So it's almost unnoticeable on a local connection, but I wonder over like an internet connection how severe it would be.
Yeah, so Digital Foundry, from the fine folks over at Eurogamer, did a breakdown, and this was a little while ago, on latency for PlayStation Now over a couple of different games and a couple of different configurations. And some of them were not, there wasn't a huge difference. Well, there was, but doable, basically, where they took Killzone Shadowfall, locked at 30 FPS via local connections, 110 millisecond input lag.
Over a local connection?
Yeah, over, just locally.
Okay, interesting.
Playing locally. Playing via Ethernet, 174 milliseconds. Via Wi-Fi, 185 milliseconds. So that's on...
So 174 via Ethernet, so you have 50% more, a little more than 50% more latency?
Yes, if your PS4 is connected via Ethernet.
And theoretically, what they're measuring as 110 milliseconds would be local, so it's pretty much unnoticeable. Right. So that doesn't seem like that big of a jump.
That one is on the lower end. There were other games where it's more noticeable. Ultra Street Fighter 4. Fighting games will, I think, always be a challenge with any sort of latency, just because the timing is so very precise and important with fighting games. But with Ultra Street Fighter 4, local latency, 58 milliseconds. Ethernet, 126. And then Wi-Fi, 128. So not a huge difference between Ethernet and Wi-Fi, but it more than doubled it.
Sure.
And that's going to be a concern for those types of games. Twitchy FPS games, also, the more latency, the more difficult the experience there. Get an RPG, get your farming simulators.
Yeah, get your turn-based
you're
RPGs.
Gonna be okay.
Yeah.
So this might be a bigger strength for some games than others, too.
But assuming this is now a new generation of tech, it's not PlayStation Now, it's whatever Microsoft is making, these numbers will be, there will be less of a gap between them, and hopefully the latency will be less noticeable, depending on obviously your internet connection and how stable that is.
And it's all down to that. What is the latency? What's the lag going to be? Right. Apparently Microsoft thinks they've got it pretty well figured out. So just a couple of excerpts from the initial leak that was reported by Thurrott. There'll be a portion of the game that runs locally. Some have referred to it as a slice or splice. Means the game is running in two locations at the same time and utilizes Microsoft's cloud to stitch it all together.
Okay, so it does sound like you'd be buying a physical game if it's running on your local system.
Or downloading it or something like that. or downloading a portion of it.
Sure.
Maybe it's a little bit like mimicking having a disk in your system. And then Microsoft's cloud platform reaches around the globe with data centers in every major market. This makes streaming the game's platform available globally, but this also likely means it can run on any type of device, so that's important. The other thing there being that for multiplayer games, if it's living next to their multiplayer servers, that could have interesting effects, potentially beneficially evenly on multiplayer latency.
Yeah. I wonder how that would work, because your player is still disconnected from that server, even though the game itself is... I don't know. It's weird.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I found interesting about this as well is, and this is important for any console generation where you have multiple versions of the console, is that all Scarlett games will run on all Scarlett devices, Scarlett being the code name of the console set, meaning both consoles will be first-class citizens, and there's not expected to be an awkward, this game only runs on the non-cloud Scarlett.
Sure. And that seems to be on brand with what they were talking about at E3, where they want people to have options, but they're not, like, no one's going to be the odd man out. And that's the important thing here, is, like, this cannot be, like, until internet is a basic human right, and high-speed internet is a basic human right with no data caps, like, no streaming services are viable for everyone.
Well, and remember, too, that when the Xbox One was initially announced, one of the sticking points with a lot of people was the 24-hour check-in policy that they were initially going to have. Exactly. Yeah. And people brought up that not everyone has access every 24 hours. Not everyone has that reliable of a connection. How is this all going to work? For a lot of those consumers, I guess they'll say you might want to get the physical console if that's the case,
right? And
that this is an optional version for people with the good internet, with people who are maybe like in like urban areas where there's gigabit and fiber and all the highest speeds that you could desire.
Totally.
And if you don't have that, then you're going to get a better experience running the game entirely locally.
Yeah, but it's cool that this is a potential option for people.
I agree.
Especially being that it can handle every game in the library. Rumored to handle every game in the library, which is great.
Now, one of the considerations, though, is what role developers will have in assisting this stitch together of what data runs locally and what runs in the cloud. Because if it's too resource intensive for the developers, you may see games not coming to the console at all, because it's just too much for them.
Right.
Remember when PS3 was a difficult development environment, there were a lot of developers complaining and choosing not to put their games on the console for that reason.
Right, and games would come out later on that system.
Yeah, it just wasn't as easy to work with, and it hurt as a result.
Yeah, I wonder if Microsoft will have something in place where, yes, it's a standard that all games are served on both consoles, but like there will be no legwork for their developers. Like it's just as simple as like Microsoft breaks it down. Who knows?
Well, it does seem to be the kind of thing that they're working on to some degree. Their fast start technology, for instance. This year at E3, they announced that they were sort of upgrading the idea of being able to start a game as it's downloading by rolling out Fast Start, which is now available for a selection of games. It's a couple dozen, where they have figured out what files are going to be needed first when someone plays a game for the first time. Right. They prioritize those files, and that's something that they're doing on their end that the developers don't have to worry about, so they can deliver the files needed for a player to get started as the rest quietly downloads.
Right. There's been crappy versions of this around where it's like, all right, you're ready to go at 10%, and you load the game. It's like, all right, we still have to download a bunch, so chill out, man.
Like, but you get to look at the start screen. Isn't
crazy.
That great?
So annoying, unbelievable. I'm glad they've started to fix that.
Yeah, one of the other potential concerns for a console like this, and this is a concern that Microsoft is in a very good place to address, is things like server overloads. So this is it's not apples to apples, but if you were to look at online games, an online game launches as an example, almost no online game has a nice, smooth launch where there are absolutely no outages, and no one is waiting in a huge queue to be able to get in, and nothing is going down.
Yeah.
That almost never happens. Again, Microsoft is better placed than most to address this.
Right, they're not a single developer. They're a
platform
monolith.
with worldwide data centers. They do pretty well with Xbox Live. There are outages here and there, but those are rarely related to server overloads so much as other
they have like their own cloud architecture already with like the Microsoft, like what is it, One Cloud, and all their, they have their own architecture or infrastructure for that stuff. So I don't really foresee scaling up as a problem for them. It's just in the initial like release of this product. At least personally. I mean, who knows? Everything can go right. Launches are always bad, but who knows?
Overall, I do hope that this streaming version doesn't overtake the traditional console version in the story that Microsoft and Xbox will want to tell with this next generation. The story getting away from them, PR communications, that story getting away from them was very bad for the Xbox One.
Right.
And while it has recovered as far as hardware sales and overall sentiment, especially with Phil Spencer doing the amazing work he's doing, he's a great person to have in charge of Xbox, in my opinion. He's like a very gamer kind of guy, and he immediately put the focus where it ought to be, which was off of, hey, you can stream your TV into your Xbox and then watch it back out of your Xbox, and think of all the TV that you can watch on your Xbox into we're pumping up Game Pass. So you can play all this. We're pumping up backwards compatibility, so you're not going to lose your games when you move ahead a generation, which I think is where their strategy is with when they say they're not thinking in terms of generations like they used to.
Right.
I think it's more like that. Doesn't mean that new iterations of hardware won't come out. It's that it doesn't necessarily mean you lose all of the games from the previous generation. Over. Exactly.
I think that this is just going to be another step in Microsoft's vision of, we are going to give players a way to play games, whether it be through the Play Anywhere with Windows, or through the Xbox, or through whatever this Xbox streaming device is. I think they're just moving to like make Xbox a platform across multiple device types, and like this is just another part of that to allow people to play whatever way they want. Because if you have people able to play on phones and stream, or on just a little Xbox device that streams from the internet, or like on a console or on Windows, like they're giving you ways to play their games, which I think this is just one little part of that.
Agreed. I'll be really curious to see what else happens in the console ecosystem with the next generation build out as well. We don't know what PlayStation's planning. They do already have PlayStation Now, which again is viable, and they can build on that. So they're already starting with a leg up to some degree. There have been reports that Google could be looking into the console space and hoping to make an all-streaming console. And we'll see if that eventuates. That one, if it's fully streaming and it's the same thing as like, here's a stick, then we'll see. Again, it relies on internet speeds, and it does limit its audience if it's just, that's your option.
You can stream your Android apps to your TV.
Well, we've seen attempts to do that kind of thing in the past with limited success, which is why I'm interested to see if this hybrid approach can work better.
Yep.
Also curious to see what you guys think about this as a potential option for the next generation of Xbox consoles. If you could get a next generation Xbox Scarlett, and pay a little bit less for it, potentially pay a subscription. That's TBD. That's, by the way, that's entirely speculation on our part, just because it will take money to run.
All this is rumors.
It's all speculation. But if you could get an Xbox that costs less, if you have the internet required to run it, would that interest you, or do you want your traditional console, you just ride or die local game the whole way? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to get more gaming news, gaming discussion, all that fun stuff, make sure you like this video. If you haven't been here before, subscribe to the Know. That way you can find all our videos too. We talk games like all day.
It's the job.
And sometimes Aquaman. And Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham is going to be Into the Spider-Verse.
Great.
It's very exciting.
Love that. It's the best part.
I'm feeling it. So weird. But leave it to Phil Lord and Chris Miller.